Senate Bill 82, an act to require an official declaration of war or other congressional action before the South Dakota National Guard may be deployed by the federal government.
Senate Bill 82, having received its second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Are there any remarks? Senator Pischke.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow Senators, today I rise in defense of the Constitution, the rule of law, and the brave men and women who serve in the South Dakota National Guard. The legislation before us, Senate Bill 82, is not just a bill, it is a stand against the executive overreach, a stand for the rightful authority of Congress, and a stand for the proper use of our National Guard. Throughout history, the military and civilian leadership have naturally been at odds in political discourse. This is not a flaw in our system, it's a deliberate safeguard. The Founding Fathers, wary of unchecked power, ensured that the decision to wage war rested with the representatives of the people, not with a single executive, not with military strategists, and certainly not through bureaucratic loopholes or executive fiat. The Constitution is not ambiguous. War-making powers belongs to Congress. That authority is not a mere formality, nor is it a power that can be bypassed. War is not simply a declaration, it is a condition. It arises by choice. When Congress debates and formally declares war, or by necessity, when America is attacked and must defend itself, this balance ensures that war is not waged recklessly, that our military is not abused, and that our citizen soldiers are not sent into battle without the full weight of constitutional authority behind them. Let's be absolutely clear about what federal law already states regarding the mobilization of the National Guard and the checks that are supposed to prevent executive abuse. Under Title 10 of the U.S. Code, the President's ability to call forth the National Guard is not unlimited. Title 10, Section 12301 requires congressional authorization before the President can activate the National Guard for federal duty. This provision reinforces the constitutional principle that war-making powers reside with Congress. Title 10, Section 12302 allows the President to call forth the National Guard without congressional approval under partial mobilization authority. But this is not intended for limited and defined emergencies, not open-ended, undeclared wars. That isn't intended, excuse me. Importantly, under 2 of the 5 subsections of 12302, state governors have the legal authority to object or deny the federalization of their National Guard troops. This design was a crucial check on federal power, ensuring the states retain a degree of control over their forces. Yet, despite these legal constraints, successive administrations have bypassed them, deploying the National Guard to foreign conflicts without proper congressional authorization. In response to these abuses of executive war-making during the Vietnam era, Congress passed the 1973 War Powers Resolution to rein in presidential overreach and restore proper congressional oversight of military engagements. The resolution required that the President notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying U.S. armed forces into hostile environments. Congress must approve military action within 60 days or demand withdrawal. And if Congress does not authorize military action, the President must withdraw forces within an additional 30 days. This law was meant to restore constitutional balance and prevent the executive branch from unilaterally engaging in prolonged military conflicts. However, here's the reality. No president, Republican or Democrat, has ever fully complied with the War Powers Resolution. Congress has repeatedly failed to enforce it, allowing presidents to sidestep it without consequence, and the Supreme Court has never issued a definite ruling on its Constitution, leaving America in legal limbo. The result? A dangerous status quo where presidents engage in military conflicts under flimsy justifications and Congress looks the other way. So let's talk about this more. South Dakota Guardsmen have been unconstitutionally deployed to foreign wars. Because of the loophole in Title 10, unchecked executive overreach, and the misapplication of the Wars Powers Act, the South Dakota National Guard, our friends, our neighbors, our family members, have been sent into conflicts without a formal declaration of war or proper congressional action. Let's consider Syria, for example. In 2013, President Obama requested congressional authorization to use military force in Syria. Congress denied it. Instead of respecting Congress's decision, the president deployed U.S. forces to Syria anyway. What happened next? At the start of the conflict, fewer than 3% of U.S. forces in Syria were from the National Guard. By 2024, that number has skyrocketed to 58%. And just last month, December 19th of 2024, we learned that the Defense Department had been lying about the number of troops in U.S. in Syria. For years, we were told that there were approximately 900 troops in Syria. But in December, Pentagon Press Secretary Major General Pat Ryder finally admitted that the number is actually closer to 2,000, more than double what we were led to believe. And how many of those troops are from the National Guard? Well, we don't know for sure, but what we do know is that many hometown newspapers across America have reported farewell ceremonies for guardsmen heading to Syria, confirming that National Guard members make up at least half of that force. This is not what the National Guard was meant for. They're playing a shell game with our citizen soldiers. So let's talk about Senate Bill 82. What does Senate Bill 82 do and what it does not do? What it does is it restores constitutional balance. It prevents South Dakota Guardsmen from being deployed into unconstitutional wars, and it reaffirms that war must be declared by Congress, not initiated through executive loopholes. What it does not do, it does not prevent the National Guard from fulfilling its rightful duties. It does not interfere with training, law enforcement, emergency response, or humanitarian missions. It does not weaken our national defense. It strengthens it by ensuring our military is used lawfully and appropriately. If war is necessary, then Congress should debate it, vote on it, and take responsibility for it, as our founders intended. South Dakota has a proud tradition of standing up for constitutional principles and defending its people. Passing Senate Bill 82 reaffirms that commitment by ensuring that South Dakota Guardsmen are only sent to war when Congress follows the law. This is not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. This is a constitutional issue. I urge you for the passage, vote yes on Senate Bill 82. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Are there any further remarks on Senate Bill 82? Senator Vilhauer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've got a question for the prime sponsor, if I could, please.
State your question.
What does our Adjutant General say about your proposed legislation?
Senator Pischke, do you wish to answer that?
Yes, I'll answer it. As you know, Senator, the Adjutant General was in committee and he opposed the legislation.
Thank you. May I continue?
Go ahead.
I joined the National Guard more years than I really care to remember or think about, and I spent 10 years involved in the Guard. It was during that time it became very evident that the mission of the Guard was changing and would continue to change for decades to come. Very simply, the regular Army forces, I was in the Army National Guard, the regular Army forces were not able to maintain their quota to the strength that they needed to be. And it was obvious that there would need to be more reliance placed upon guards, people that were in the Guard. As a result, over the years and for decades to come, and probably for decades to come, the role of the Guard has been an important part of any number of areas around the world, in peacekeeping actions, administrative actions, as well as military actions. And sadly, some of them did not come home. For my own unit where I used to attend, there was a couple of casualties that members were killed. Very sad to see. But I feel like those brave men and women served a purpose in strengthening not only our national defense system, but ultimately here in South Dakota as well. When I joined the Guard, the oath that I took said I would protect and preserve the Constitution of South Dakota as well as preserve and protect the Constitution of the United States. I'm going to borrow a term from my colleague across the aisle here. I joined the National Guard, not the State Guard. Please vote against this.
Thank you. Further remarks on Senate Bill 82? Senator Howard.
Thank you, Mr. President. Having served active duty Air Force, this bill does have some significance to me, so I do feel compelled to speak on this. But this bill is about stopping the federal overreach that is encroaching on every single aspect of our lives. This bill ensures that our National Guard, which we have the best National Guard in the country, kudos to our National Guard because they are awesome. But this is simply ensuring that they are only going to be deployed into combat under constitutional, lawful circumstances. It has nothing to do with whether we like the deployments, they like the deployments, whether we like the federal involvement in this, has nothing to do with that. It all comes down to the Constitution. James Madison, the chief architect of the Constitution, warned against executive-led wars, writing, "The executive is a branch of power most interested in war and most prone to it, and is accordingly, with studied care, vested with no power of declaring war. Congress and only Congress has the sole authority to declare war. It can't be delegated." And I believe we should be resisting the feds activating our National Guard at will for overseas combat deployments. So while we have had no official declaration of war since World War II, my grandfather fought in the Korean War. My mom served during peacetime shortly after the Vietnam War. My husband and I were both active duty during the first Gulf War, and our son is now serving in the never-ending War on Terror. Are they actual wars? Then Congress needs to act and actually declare war. But instead, we've been operating under this never-ending authorization for use of military force. Our troops are deployed around the world, and that includes our National Guard, which is why we're here today. They are deployed around the world for wars that aren't wars. And believe me, I am grateful to have been able to serve. I am grateful that my son is serving, and for all our National Guard troops and our active duty troops that took that oath to support and defend our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath never expires, and that is why when these issues come up, it is somewhat very personal for me. I'm asking this body not to take that oath lightly. Our federal government is taking that oath lightly. I had a friend several years ago. Her husband had been on 5 deployments in the first 5 years after their youngest child's life. He committed suicide. We lose close to 19 veterans every single day to suicide. We cannot take this lightly when we just so cavalierly send our troops overseas. We need to restore the constitutional balance, and we need to defend our Guard. Thank you.
Further remarks on Senate Bill 82? Senator Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to this bill today because it is an unconstitutional attempt to impose a state law that's in a conflict with federal orders. I think it's important to make sure people realize that members of the National Guard have 2 roles. They are dual members. They're members of the South Dakota National Guard, and when called into federal service, they become members of the National Guard of the United States. And so if you pass this bill, what you're saying is that if they are called up into federal service, they're going to have, in one hand, a deployment order coming from their commanding officer, telling them that they're going to deploy somewhere. On the other hand, they're going to have the state law. And you're going to put that Guard member in a terrible position to decide, what do I follow? And we can't do that. You may disagree with national policy regarding declarations of war. I do. I completely agree. I wish Congress would assert itself more in the war-making, war-declaring powers. I wish it wouldn't have these never-ending AUMFs that they use to go anywhere and everywhere. But we don't use our members of the South Dakota National Guards as pawns in that federal policymaking debate. We cannot pass a bill that tells our members to violate federal orders. Vote no.
Are there further remarks? Senator Perry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I went to my friend Siri because sometimes Google is busy and sometimes Alexa is busy, but she says the National Guard's purpose is to protect the United States and its communities by fighting in wars, responding to disasters, and defending the homeland. The National Guard is a reserve force for the Army and the Air Force. I say when we have a bill like 82, we have to really think about what it's trying to say. I think it was well thought out, but I really believe that we need to follow the orders of the general. We need to follow the orders of the National Guard. We need to endorse this and say no.
Further remarks? Senator Voigt.
Thank you, Mr. President. I come to you today as a vet. Regarding this issue, I think it's down to one word. It's called national. We say National Guard. That's reference to this nation. If we want to be in control of our soldiers in this state, we need to identify them as state guards. When I was asked to serve this nation, I indicated and swore that I would swear to uphold the Constitution of this state and the United States. This National Guard is responsible for our welfare as a nation and not as a state. We need to make a decision in terms of the representation of the state, who these warriors are, and what they are going to be asked to do. Are we simply an identified body as part of this nation, or are we in this nation in its defense? There are, unfortunately, obligations in terms of when we look at cost of lives and fortunes, and the reality of those that pay the ultimate price. National Guardsmen understand that they are asked to make that commitment when this nation calls. They're not volunteering as regulars are, who don't have an identity anymore because they are a number. National Guardsmen have a life that they can live basically most of the time as civilians, but they understand they may be called to pay that price for those of us that enjoy the life that we have. I ask you to vote no on this.
Further remarks? Senator Dybert.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the body. I rise against this bill today for many reasons. If you look back in history during the Vietnam era and even the Eisenhower administration forward, we've strengthened our National Guard. As you drive through South Dakota and you see the National Guard bases throughout the state, you see heavy equipment, you see helicopters in the Air Guard, you see all this equipment and training that is accessible to our National Guard because of federal dollars and federal training. That's why we're the best guard in the United States, is because of that training. We need that partnership. I ask you to vote no.
Further remarks? Senator Hulse.
I have a question for the prime sponsor.
State your question.
Has any other state passed legislation such as this?
Senator Pischke, do you wish to respond?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. At this time, no other state has passed this. It has passed through the Senate, I believe, in Idaho, but no state has actually passed it all the way at this point.
Can I have a follow-up question?
State your question.
Has this legislature ever heard legislation before similar to this?
You wish to respond?
Mr. President, thank you. Yes, I would. Yes, this legislation has been introduced in the South Dakota legislature at least for the last 3 years.
Further remarks, Senator Halls.
Yes. I didn't plan on getting up and speaking about this today, but I feel compelled. As the daughter of a 100% disabled Vietnam veteran, I'm well aware of the impacts of war, even decades later, and how PTSD and other impacts of service can hurt our service members and their families. I'm well aware of how important it is to bring them home because I grew up with someone who, since he was 18 years old, has suffered the impacts of his service and how that bleeds into our military families. We all need to do a better job of keeping our U.S. service members out of other nations' conflicts, and we do not need to be the world's police force. I will also mention that I consider myself a constitutional conservative, and I understand the intent of this bill to require the federal level to follow what our Constitution says. But that's what this is. It's an issue that we need to deal with on the federal level. And I'm grateful of the direction of our new commander-in-chief, who is not a warmonger or a neocon Republican of the past. And I expect and hope that under his leadership, we will see less abuse of our state National Guard and to serve our federal interests instead of our state, including helping with international conflicts that we shouldn't be involved in. But as the prime sponsor of this bill has mentioned, presidents of both parties have not followed these procedures, much because times have changed. Do I disagree with the direction that we've taken? Absolutely. But would I also love it if our regular armies and air forces were fully staffed and that we did not have to rely on our state forces? Yes. However, it's almost 96, 97% of our so-called state forces that are paid by federal funds and that are put to use in South Dakota frequently during every natural disaster, flood, or tragedy that our state suffers. There are other ways to accomplish what this bill seeks to do, and no other state has taken this action yet. And this legislation has been proposed in 30 states over the last several years and has not passed. I watched the presentation from the National Guard on an early morning a few weeks ago and saw how they're training in Japan all over the world. And I will not stand for tying our own hands and stopping readiness missions. Those training and peacekeeping missions may not be allowed or be authorized under this bill, from my understanding. At the end of the day, it seems like this is being pushed by out-of-state groups who think that they know best for South Dakota. But I listen to the servicemen themselves, the ones who are being sent out on the front lines, all of which who have told me to vote no today. And some of these men are currently serving on the southern border right now. I would ask my colleagues that if we think that we will be declaring war against our neighbor to the south, Mexico, anytime soon. And by the way, many of the conflicts over the last several years were not spurred by nations themselves that could have been declared war against, but rather radical groups and not directly affiliated with any one government. This is not about our servicemen liking deployments or not. I know many of these folks are more than willing to serve and will go every single time they're called. This is about the second, third, and fourth order effects on the folks wearing the uniform, all of who are telling me that this is a bad bill. I'm voting no, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same.
Further remarks, Senator Hone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 82. Wow, I've really struggled with how to vote on this today after the committee last week. Since committee, I have gained additional information, including the knowledge that our congressional delegation has not met with our state legislators who are hearing the concerns of our fellow South Dakotans. I couldn't agree more with the sentiment of this bill, but I do have great concern for the practical effect of it. The unintended consequences that are dangerous by forcing Congress's hand with a few states. The issue is trust, trusting the chain of command. Unfortunately, we have a problem of trust at the highest levels. Congress hasn't functioned the way it should in accordance with the Constitution. But since last week, discussions are starting to happen between our state legislators and the congressional delegation. Now that the door is finally opened, we need to keep these discussions going. A national law change would be more effective than a state law that will create more conflicts. Both the Adjutant General, Mark Morrell, and Deputy Secretary Michaels are encouraging this dialogue. Let's give it a year. I'm willing to help make these meetings happen. I will be voting no in good faith today that these meetings are going to continue to happen, but if we haven't made meaningful strides by next year, my vote will be different. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further remarks on Senate Bill 82? Further remarks. Senator Zickman. Senator Zickman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I too am a veteran during Vietnam. I was proud of that military time, very proud. I now have a grandson who serves in the South Dakota Army Guard. He is very proud of the service that he is providing in the Army Guard. If you pass this, which I would recommend that you not do, you're going to set history. One of 32 states that did pass this kind of legislation. You know, we really need to let the Guard do what the heck they do and stay out of the business of trying to tell the Guard what to do. I received quite a few emails, positive emails. I was the only one that voted no on the bill in committee. And I'd like to just read one. It says, I'm a 33-year veteran of the United States Air Force and South Dakota National Guard, one of the best in the country. My last two duty positions were in senior leadership positions within the 114th Fighter Wing, 7 years as the Aircraft Maintenance Squadron Commander and 2 as the Maintenance Group Deputy Commander. Senate Bill 82, in my opinion, well-intentioned, but could have a very negative effect on the 114th Fighter Wing. The 114th has certain mission sets that are necessary to combatant commanders to utilize to prevent war conflict. Requiring an act of Congress in order to deploy the unit would cause the 114th to be mission ineffective, and I believe the United States Air Force would make funding and equipping decisions accordingly, which means they wouldn't fund it. I believe the bill will defund the South Dakota Air National Guard, not defend it. That's one of the emails that I've received. And what was mentioned before, this bill will become unconstitutional. You're going to have lawsuits. You're going to have attorney fees. Who's going to defend it? Who's going to pay for those? You as taxpayers are going to do that. There's a lot of information that was given to you today from the general and his people, and I want to thank them for that. By the way, I want to thank all those of you that were in the military, served in the military, served in the Guard. You have a lot of my regard. But you got a lot of information from the people that actually work the Guard, actually understand what these situations are. We don't do that. I've been out of the military for a long time, quite a long time, almost as long as Sam here. And by the way, Sam, thanks for serving in Vietnam. But they're the ones that make and know what is needed. We don't do that. So I'm encouraging you to defeat this bill and stay the hell out of the National Guard business. Thank you, people.
Further remarks on Senate Bill 82. Yep, Senator Pischke to close it out.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to close this out for us here today. Well, thank you, everyone. I really do appreciate all the vigorous debate and all the opinions you have. And just so you know, I mean, I have the utmost respect for our South Dakota National Guard. I'm not trying to use them as pawns in any way. That's not the intent here. You know, the legislation really comes from a point of frustration with our Congress. You know, we've had our young men and women for generations sent across the pond to fight in all these unconstitutional wars. I think that's ridiculous. Just to address a couple things that was said here, you know, in regards to the federal funding, I do believe that the National Guard's funding is still statutorily required under the National Defense Authorization Act, and there's some related laws to that too. So, you know, I can't get into the details of that. I don't know, but I think there's still going to be federal funding there. On top of that, you know, the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has actually come out and has been in favor of this legislation because it's going to force Congress's hand. That's the whole point here, is that we're actually going to force Congress to do something instead of just sitting on their hands and doing nothing for years and years and years. So I understand that you're scared of the unintended consequences and what that may be, but I'm tired of Congress doing nothing, and so that's why the legislation was brought forth. So I ask for a yes vote, and God bless and have a great day.
Thank you. The question before the Senate is final passage of Senate Bill 82. This is a roll call vote. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed, nay. The Secretary will call the roll.
Senators Beal, Blanc, Carley, Crabtree, Davis, Dybert, Duhamel, Foster, Grove, Hone, Howard, Hulse, Jensen, Carr, Kolbeck, Lapke, Larson, Marty, Melhoff, Miskimmons, Nelson, Otten, Perry, Peterson, Pischke, Reed, Roll, Sauter, Shanefish, Smith, Vilhauer, Voigt, Voida, Wheeler, Zickman, Foster. Mr. President, we have 6 yeas, 29 nays.
So Senate Bill 82, having failed to receive an affirmative vote of a majority of the members elect, the President declares the bill lost.